My daughter's rich boyfriend laughed at my simple lifestyle, insulted me, and said, "I'll be taking care of her now." I replied, "Good luck." Then I fired his father from my company. Now he is begging to reconsider my decision after his father cut him off. I, 52M, never thought a 20-minute conversation would change everything about my relationship with my daughter and teach a spoiled Brett the hardest lesson of his life. My daughter came home last Tuesday with her boyfriend of 8 months. She'd mentioned him before, but this was the first time I was meeting him face to face. The moment he walked into my modest 3-bedroom house, I could see the judgment in his eyes. He scanned our living room with its second-hand furniture and my collection of paperback novels like he was surveying a crime scene. We sat down for dinner, and I tried to make conversation. I asked him about his studies, his plans after graduation, the usual father-meeting-boyfriend questions. His answers were short, dismissive. He kept checking his phone and making little comments under his breath that my daughter either didn't hear or chose to ignore. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was clearing the dinner plates when he made a comment about how different my daughter's life would be once they were serious. He said she deserved better than this simple lifestyle, gesturing around our kitchen with obvious disdain. I stayed calm, continuing to stack the dishes, but I could feel the tension building. He went on to explain how his family had money, real money, and how he could give my daughter things I never could. Designer clothes, expensive vacations, a lifestyle befitting someone of her beauty and intelligence. The way he said it made it clear he thought I was holding her back. I asked him what he did for work, genuinely curious about how a 23-year-old had accumulated such wealth. He laughed and told me he didn't need to work because his father took care of everything. His father had a high-paying corporate job that funded his son's lavish lifestyle. That's when he made his biggest mistake. He looked me straight in the eye and told me not to worry about my daughter anymore because he'd be taking care of her from now on. The arrogance in his voice, the assumption that I was somehow failing as a father, the sheer disrespect of it all hit me like a physical blow. I simply replied that I wished him good luck with that. My daughter looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. After they left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about that conversation. The disrespect stung, but what bothered me most was my daughter's silence. Had I really failed her so badly that she'd chosen someone who looked down on everything I'd worked for? The next morning, I did something I rarely do. I looked up this young man's father online. It took me about 10 minutes to find him on LinkedIn. Regional sales director at a mid-sized manufacturing company. Decent position, good salary, nothing spectacular, but enough to spoil a son who'd never learned the value of money. The company name looked familiar, and after checking my files, I realized why. They were one of our vendors. Not a huge account, but they'd been supplying components to my company for about 3 years. His father had been our main contact for the past 18 months. I should explain something here. When people hear about my simple lifestyle, my modest house, my secondhand furniture, they make assumptions. The same assumptions my daughter's boyfriend made. They assume I'm struggling, that I'm just getting by, that I'm someone to be pitied or dismissed. They're wrong. 25 years ago, I started a small manufacturing business in my garage. I worked 18-hour days, slept on a cot in my office, and reinvested every penny back into the company. While other people were buying bigger houses and fancier cars, I was building something that would last. Today, my company employs over 200 people and generates 8 figures in annual revenue. I own the building, the equipment, and have enough money in the bank to retire comfortably tomorrow if I wanted to. But I still live in the same house because it's home. I still drive my 10-year-old truck because it works perfectly. I still buy my books used because there's nothing wrong with a good story that's been read before. I never flaunted my success. I raised my daughter to understand the value of hard work and humility. Apparently, I'd succeeded too well because even she didn't fully grasp the scope of what I'd built. The morning after that dinner, I called a meeting with my procurement team. I told them we'd be terminating our contract with the boyfriend's father's company, effective immediately. When they asked why, I explained that we were consolidating vendors to improve efficiency. It was a legitimate business decision. We had other suppliers who could provide the same components at competitive prices. The termination letter went out that afternoon. I didn't think about it again until Friday, when my daughter called me in tears. She told me her boyfriend's father had been fired from his job. Apparently, losing our contract had been the final straw for a company that was already looking to cut costs. Her boyfriend was devastated because his father had immediately cut off his allowance and told him to find a job. My daughter asked if there was anything I could do to help. She said her boyfriend's family was struggling, and she felt terrible seeing him so upset. I told her I was sorry to hear about their troubles, but didn't elaborate. That weekend, her boyfriend showed up at my door alone. Gone was the arrogant young man who dismissed my lifestyle 3 days earlier. He looked haggard, desperate. He apologized for his behavior at dinner and asked if we could talk. I invited him in and offered him coffee. He sat in the same chair where he'd insulted my home, but now he seemed to see it differently. He told me his father had been fired, that the family was facing serious financial problems, and that he didn't know what to do. Then he asked if I knew anyone in the manufacturing industry who might be hiring. He'd done some research on local companies and discovered that I owned one of the larger operations in the area. He wondered if I might know someone who could help his father find a new position. I let him finish his request before I responded. I told him I'd think about it and get back to him. He left looking hopeful, probably thinking he'd successfully humbled himself before the simple man whose daughter he was dating. He had no idea. Update 1. The story gets more interesting from here. After her boyfriend left my house, my daughter called me. She was excited, thinking I might actually help his family. She told me how grateful her boyfriend was that I'd listened to him, how he'd realized he'd been wrong about me, and how much it would mean to their relationship if I could help. I asked her a question that had been bothering me since Tuesday night. I wanted to know why she hadn't said anything when her boyfriend insulted our home and dismissed my ability to provide for her. Her answer broke my heart. She told me she'd been embarrassed, not by his behavior, but by our house, our lifestyle, our apparent lack of money. She'd been dating him for 8 months and had seen how the other half lived. She'd started to see our home through his eyes and found it wanting. That conversation lasted 2 hours. I didn't tell her about my company or my decision regarding her boyfriend's father. Instead, I asked her about her values, about what she thought made a person worthy of respect, about whether she believed money was the most important measure of success. Her answers weren't what I'd hoped to hear. The next Monday, her boyfriend called me. He'd been thinking about our conversation and wanted to know if I'd had a chance to consider his request. I told him I had indeed been thinking about it and asked if he could come by the house again that evening. He arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, clearly anxious but trying to maintain his composure. I offered him the same coffee, and we sat in the same chairs. Then I told him I had some questions before I could consider helping his family. I asked him why he thought he was good enough for my daughter. Not what he could provide for her financially, but what he brought to her life as a person. I asked him about his goals, his work ethic, his character. I asked him what he planned to do now that his father's money was no longer available. His answers revealed exactly what I'd suspected. He'd never worked a day in his life, had no marketable skills, no real ambitions beyond spending his father's money. He'd been coasting on privilege and good looks, assuming that would be enough forever. Then I asked him the question that really mattered. I wanted to know if he loved my daughter for who she was, or if he loved the idea of having a beautiful girlfriend to show off to his wealthy friends. I wanted to know if he'd still want to be with her if she lived in this simple house for the rest of her life. His hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I thanked him for his honesty and told him I'd be in touch about his father's situation. He left looking confused, but still hopeful. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Update 2. I spent the next week doing research. Not just on the boyfriend's father, but on their entire family situation. What I discovered was both enlightening and disturbing. The father hadn't just lost his job because of my canceled contract. He'd been on thin ice for months due to poor performance and questionable business practices. My contract termination had simply accelerated an inevitable outcome. The family's financial problems ran deeper than just the loss of income. They'd been living far beyond their means, accumulating debt to maintain their lavish lifestyle. The boyfriend, meanwhile, had been telling people at school that he was practically engaged to my daughter and that her father was some kind of successful businessman who approved of their relationship. He was using my daughter's connection to me to boost his own social status, even as he privately mocked my lifestyle. I also learned something that made my blood boil. He'd been pressuring my daughter to ask me for money. He'd told her that if I really cared about her happiness, I'd help support their relationship financially. He'd planted the idea that a father who loved his daughter would want to contribute to her boyfriend's family during their time of need. My daughter, still unaware of my true financial situation, had been agonizing over how to approach me about this. She'd been planning to ask me to take out a loan or dip into my retirement savings to help her boyfriend's family. That's when I decided it was time to end this charade. I called my daughter and asked her to come over for dinner on Friday night. I told her to bring her boyfriend because I had something important to discuss with both of them. Friday evening arrived, and they both showed up looking hopeful. My daughter kept giving her boyfriend encouraging looks, clearly believing this dinner would result in good news for his family. I served them a simple meal, the same kind I'd been making in this kitchen for years. But this time, I also laid out some documents on the table. Financial statements, business records, property deeds. Things that told the real story of my life. I started by telling them about my business. I explained how I'd built it from nothing, how it had grown over the years, and what it was worth today. I watched their faces change as the numbers sank in. My daughter looked shocked, then confused, then hurt. Her boyfriend's expression shifted from surprise to calculation to embarrassment. Then I told them about the contract cancellation. I explained exactly who her boyfriend's father worked for, how long we'd been doing business, and why I'd chosen to terminate our relationship. I was clear about the connection between the young man's disrespectful behavior and his father's subsequent unemployment. The silence that followed was deafening. My daughter was the first to speak. She asked why I'd never told her about the money, about the business, about any of it. I explained that I'd wanted her to understand the value of hard work and humility, to judge people by their character rather than their bank accounts. I wanted her to be proud of who I was as a person, not what I could provide materially. Her boyfriend, meanwhile, was frantically trying to process this new information. I could see him recalculating everything he thought he knew about me, about my daughter, about their relationship. Then I addressed him directly. I told him that his father's employment situation was unfortunate, but it was also a consequence of his son's arrogance and disrespect. I explained that respect wasn't something you could buy or inherit. It was something you earned through your actions and character. I offered him a choice. He could continue dating my daughter, but he'd have to prove himself worthy of her through his own efforts, not his family's money. He'd have to get a job, learn some humility, and treat both my daughter and me with the respect we deserved. Or he could walk away now and save everyone the trouble. Update 3. The boyfriend's reaction was everything I'd expected and worse. Instead of showing any remorse or accepting responsibility, he became angry. He accused me of ruining his family's life out of spite, of being petty and vindictive. He said I'd tricked him into believing I was just some poor, simple man when I was actually wealthy enough to destroy people's lives on a whim. The irony was completely lost on him. He turned to my daughter and told her she needed to choose between him and me. He said I was manipulative and controlling, that I'd been lying to her for years about our financial situation. He painted me as the villain in a story where he was somehow the victim. My daughter's response surprised both of us. She told him to leave. She said she'd been thinking a lot over the past week about values, about what kind of person she wanted to be and what kind of people she wanted in her life. She realized that his reaction to learning about my business told her everything she needed to know about his character. A man who truly loved her would have been happy to discover that her father was successful and secure. Instead, he was angry that he'd been denied the opportunity to look down on me. He was upset that his narrative of superiority had been shattered. He left that night, and I haven't seen him since. But the story doesn't end there. Over the next month, word spread through my daughter's social circle about what had happened. The boyfriend had been telling his version of events, painting himself as the victim of a crazy, vindictive businessman who destroyed his family over a minor disagreement. What he didn't count on was my daughter's friends doing their own research. They discovered the truth about my company, about his father's employment history, about the real reasons behind the contract termination. The story that emerged painted a very different picture than the one he'd been telling. His reputation at school was destroyed. The wealthy friends who'd accepted him based on his family's status wanted nothing to do with someone who'd been exposed as arrogant and disrespectful. The girls who'd been impressed by his designer clothes and expensive car lost interest when they learned he'd been living off his father's money while insulting the very people who'd made that lifestyle possible. He tried to reach out to my daughter multiple times, apologizing and asking for another chance. She ignored his calls and messages. He even showed up at our house once, but I made it clear he wasn't welcome. 3 months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd finally gotten a job. Nothing glamorous, just entry-level work at a retail store. His father had found new employment as well, but at a significantly lower salary than his previous position. The family had been forced to downsize their home and give up most of their luxury possessions. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles. I'd never wanted to destroy anyone's life. I'd simply wanted to teach a lesson about respect and consequences. Final update. 6 months after that life-changing dinner, my daughter and I are closer than we've ever been. The experience taught both of us valuable lessons about honesty, values, and what really matters in life. She's dating someone new now, a young man who works part-time while finishing his engineering degree. He drives an old Honda, wears clothes from Target, and treats both my daughter and me with genuine respect. When I told him about my business, his reaction was to congratulate me on building something successful while staying true to my values. My daughter has also started working part-time at my company, not in some made-up executive position, but on the factory floor, learning the business from the ground up. She says she wants to understand what I built and why it matters. She's discovering the satisfaction that comes from honest work and earned success. As for her former boyfriend, I heard he eventually transferred to a different school. The social fallout from his behavior had made his situation untenable, and he decided a fresh start somewhere else was his best option. His father never contacted me directly about the contract termination. I think he understood that his son's behavior had consequences that extended beyond just business. Some lessons are expensive, but they're also necessary. I've thought a lot about whether I handled the situation correctly. Could I have been more direct from the beginning? Should I have told my daughter about my financial success years earlier? Was I wrong to tie business decisions to personal relationships? In the end, I believe I made the right choices. Respect isn't negotiable. Character matters more than money. And sometimes, the most important lessons are the ones that cost us the most to learn. My daughter learned that true worth isn't measured by bank accounts or material possessions. Her former boyfriend learned that arrogance and disrespect have consequences. And I learned that protecting the people you love sometimes requires making difficult decisions. The simple lifestyle I chose wasn't a reflection of my limitations. It was a reflection of my values. The young man who laughed at my modest home and promised to take care of my daughter discovered that real security doesn't come from inherited wealth or unearned privilege. It comes from hard work, good character, and the respect of people who matter. I still live in the same house, drive the same truck, and buy my books used. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. And now my daughter understands the difference. That understanding is worth more than all the money in my business accounts combined.